Hello, I'm Kads, and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be talking about my fusion plan for the latest and greatest fusion champion in the game, Bambus Fourleaf, a legendary Skinwalker Magic Affinity support champion. So first off, this is a traditional style fusion, meaning that you have to get and level up the rares, fuse them into the epics, level them up, and fuse them into the legendary champion to then claim him for yourself. And I must say, it's been a long time since they've had a quad rare, a traditional fusion. In the past few months, maybe the past year or so, it's been like one rare 16 times or two rares 8 times each or something like that. But in the olden days, way back, it used to always be 4 rares and always 4 new epics. In this case, there's only 2 new epics that are part of the fusion, but hey, this is the closest we've had to one of the super old school traditional fusions. So let's talk through his kit and see if he's worthy of fusing. So on the A1, attacks when enemy has a 50% chance of placing the big version of decreased speed, but it will become an AoE if the initial target has 2 or more debuffs, which is a pretty easy condition to get or to meet. And then the chance drops down to 40%. This is unbooked, so when it is booked, you get up to a 75% chance of the single target and then a 65% chance of the AoE. And more often than not, when you place 2 debuffs on some target, he's going to be able to do the AoE. So I would bank on it being the 65% chance AoE decreased speed for 2 turns. Now the next bit is part of every single one of his abilities, and it's kind of the pillar of his capabilities, where he will always put himself to sleep on every single one of his active abilities, and it cannot be blocked or resisted. So even if he has blocked debuffs up, he will still put himself to sleep. The benefit of that will make a lot more sense when we get to his passive, but let's continue on here. On the A2, this is an AoE attack, and before attacking, it'll place a shield on all allies equal to 30% of his max HP, which is good because he is a support. We can look at his base stats here. 21k on the HP is pretty beefy, as well as 1200 on the defense, 110 on the speed as well while we're here. So very quick. But he has a healthy amount of HP. He is a support champion, and so having a shield be 30% of his max HP will make it a pretty sizable shield. Also, it can increase the duration of all buffs on all allies by 1 turn. Granted, this is on a 4-turn cooldown, so it's not as effective as like a Godseeker Iniri or Sinlast Survivor in terms of keeping your buffs up. It's not going to work with an Infinity type team just because of the cooldowns and stuff like that, but it is nonetheless a nice ability just to kind of extend some buffs here and there. Now also, when you do book him, he gets a 100% chance of decreasing the duration of all enemy buffs by 1 turn, even if it lands on a weak hit. So this will work through Poison Cloud, for example, in Hydra, or just on any weak Affinity target. And this will also increase the value of any shield buffs on all allies by 2% for each enemy buff that had its duration decreased by this skill. So there's been a lot of chatter about how and if this will work with a Corpulent Cadaver team that's very popular in the Hydra nowadays, as well as formerly Demon Lord Clan boss. But this will definitely not work. We've kind of seen it. I think Scratch kind of did a really good video on that if you want to check his out, to kind of demo it and show that it really doesn't work. And you can kind of infer that it won't work. One, because the condition here is that he has to decrease the amount of buffs on enemies. And if you're using a Corpulent Cadaver team, you're going to be killing the heads basically after a few turns once you start to ramp up the shield with a Brogni, and so it's just not going to work because there's no buffs to decrease, therefore you can't increase the shield. So it's just not going to work. You can remove that from your mind. That's not really a thing that's going to work with this champion. And once again, after this ability as well, he'll put himself to sleep. It can't be blocked or resisted. On the A3, last ability here targets an enemy, but before he hits them, it will place increased attack and increased accuracy on all allies, which is pretty nice. So this is a good bomb opener abilities, and his base speed is relatively high, so you could build him fast. If you don't have like a Yoshi the Drunkard, this could be your guy as far as placing increased attack, increased accuracy before a bomber goes, which are the best buffs. And then once you book him, 100% chance to place an Enfeeble debuff on the target enemy. Now, Enfeeble is a fairly new debuff. It used to be exclusive to the Shogun's Grove, or the Shogun Dungeon, or the Shogun boss for himself. And essentially, once the Enfeeble debuff is on you, it means that you will always hit weak. And so it can be very useful in like an arena setting, because one, it can't work on bosses anyway, so don't think about it for that purpose. But it's really useful in an arena setting. You put it on that pesky nuker, that Trundo you're worried about, or that Hefrak, or whoever, and they cannot crit, or they're always going to weak hit, and so you're just going to nullify them. But obviously it can be cleansed, it can be removed, so it's not a foolproof method, but it can get you out of a sticky situation in a pinch. In addition to that, when it's booked, it will give you 100% chance of placing an AoE decreased accuracy debuff for 2 turns. Once again, this is on a 4-turn cooldown, if we scroll down, which is somewhat unfortunate. So he's a 1-4-4 champion, so he's not going to rotate as cleanly. It's just going to be I guess 4-4-1-1 is his ability rotation. And then lastly, of course, he's going to place sleep on himself. native to every single one of his abilities. So why on earth is he sleeping himself? Let's talk about the passive here. So the passive effect is that he has a 50-50 chance of transferring any debuffs on an ally to himself while he's under a sleep debuff. So after he takes a turn, he puts himself to sleep, and if something happens to your allies, it has a 50-50 shot of him taking their debuffs, as long as it's not one of these CC debuffs. So none of the stun, fear, freeze, etc., none of those will be transferred, but all your poisons, your HP burn, decrease attack, decrease defense, weaken, etc., stuff like that. Also important to note here that, of course, he at the start of his turn on a 0-turn cooldown, so he will always do this, he will always remove the sleep from himself when he starts his turn, so you don't have to worry about him sleeping through turns or wasting turns, etc. And lastly, the active part of the passive, it will transfer all debuffs from this champion to the enemy with the highest amount of resistance if the sleep was removed by himself, meaning it's removed by the passive part of his passive. And then this effect cannot be resisted. So you will basically, as long as that condition is met, you will always throw all the debuffs on himself, including the ones he stole from allies. If he's asleep with the active or with the passive part of the passive, you'll throw them all onto the target with the highest resistance. So that could be a Mithrala, for example. It can't be resisted, so that's good. Could be any of the bosses. And so stuff like that, it can be very, very useful. He does have an aura, which is HP in all battles by 25%. So that if you use him for your aura lead, that means you will have a bigger shield on the A2, and also just give your team more survivability. So overall, I give him like a solid B-. I understand that on paper his kit seems very, very, very niche, but I think it is also very unique, and perhaps we just don't fully understand how to use it properly and where it can be super useful. I know there's been a couple of videos out there already with some takes on him, and I think the best, at least understandings thus far of his kit has been by Nubraids or Nubkex, and he put him in an Avenging set, which was changed 4 months ago to be like a 45% chance to counterattack when a debuff is landed on the champion. And the initial concern, and rightly so, was that his passive is weird because sleep is one thing that can be removed as soon as you're hit, and a lot of bosses are known for doing AoEs, and so you really wouldn't get the part of the active part of this effect, because usually he'd be woken up by the enemy instead of waking himself up by removing the sleep at the start of his turn. However, what Nub was able to show is that with the Avenging set, or any type of counterattack sets, realistically speaking, essentially he gets hit, he counterattacks with the A1, puts himself back to sleep, and then he's ready to go whenever his turn comes around to do what his passive is meant to do, which is transfer debuffs. So you can definitely make his kit work, particularly with artifacts or sets or accessories that counterattack. And so he definitely has that usage, and it was proven again by Nubkex in places like the Dragon, places like Hydra. So he can definitely do some pretty cool things, and I recommend that you go for him if you can, but I totally understand if you guys want to skip it as well. So if you are interested in pursuing this fusion, then let's talk about my fusion plan just to make sure that we can all get the lovely, wonderful panda. So for this fusion, we have a pretty standard layout here. We have the 4 dungeon splits. We have 2 classic arena tournaments, 1 champion training tournament, 1 champion chase tournament, 3 divers, 3 art enhance, 1 champion training event, as well as the summon rush with an accompanying 10x. Overall, the most noteworthy elements here are that I guess having the shorter duration is just the new normal. It's been that way for the past 4 fusions, something under 2 weeks. In this case, it's 13 days long. So maybe this is the new normal. We're just going to have relatively shorter fusions, so they're going to be more condensed, meaning you have less time in between like artifact enhancements or less time in between dungeon divers. So just be wary of that if you're going for the fusion. The pinch points or areas where you would have to think about your energy wisely. One here at the start, although we'll talk about what the strategy to take here. So you have champion training overlapping with a couple of dungeons, but I think the major one to worry about is this champion training event that is entirely covered by 2 dungeon tournaments, Fire Knight and Spider. So you're going to have to do a lot of good management during this time frame here to make sure that you're allocating your energy appropriately to be able to get both segments done. One good thing here is that the champion chase should fall under 2 times ancients. So if you're on the fence about pursuing this fusion, just know that the champion chase is basically given, because 2 times ancients is definitely the most accessible one to all types of players. And so I would not worry about whatever the milestone is going to be. If you have upwards of 60 ancient shards, you're pretty much good to go. But also, once you get there, since it's during the later half of the fusion, you should have maybe 2, maybe 3 epics to fuse for the fusion itself, and thus you can get 250 points per epic, and then that's 500 or 750 points towards that whatever milestone is, whatever the milestone is going to be. And so you can pad your total with the epics from the fusion, which just kind of helps you overall. Of course, because it is a champion chase, you could also pad it with previous fragment summon champions, day long reward champions, doom tower champions, whatever tickles your fancy. So all of those options will work as well during the champion chase. As always, here on the right side, we do have all of the milestones and estimated costs for participating in each of the events and tournaments. The dungeons are pretty standard at 2250 to get the rare in this case, as well as classic arenas always around 390. That's never a problem unless you're like in early game in bronze or something, then it might be a bit harder. We already know the amount for the champion training tournament going on, 5500, which is pretty par for the course, nothing extreme, somewhere in the middle. There is a legendary tome up for grabs at 10,000 points, so I do encourage you to pursue that if you're in the mood to do some champion trainings, particularly here at the start of the fusion. Talked about the champion chase. We got 3 divers events. These are estimated. Anything with an asterisk is an estimated value. Usually I'm just basing it off of previous iterations of fusions and based on the number of days that the events go on, and we can kind of extrapolate from there. 47.75 seems to be the new normal for artifact enhancement, even though they're 3 days. So just make sure you have enough silver. Usually it would cost you worst case 25 million per. So yes, you will need 75 million silver across all the events to do the entire fusion, but keep in mind that you're going to be earning silver while you do champion training and run the dungeons, etc. And lastly, we do have champion training event estimated around 7,000 points. The summon rush is where things can get a little bit interesting depending on your strategy. There's always a milestone at 2150, the lower milestone where you can just get the rare and you can collect, make sure that you get all of the rares, all 16 of them. 2150 is usually 4 sacreds and 150 mystery shards, so it's relatively easy to obtain. But if you do want to skip some of the events, you always have the option to go all the way out to the epic. I'm estimating that this is going to be 3,500, but it could venture all the way up, as worst case up to like 4925 is probably the highest we've ever seen, so around 10 sacreds, but 3,500 usually around 7 sacreds, or 3 more than 4. And so you have the option there, because if you do go for the epic, then you can come back and skip some of the events because you already have the equivalent of 4 of the rares. But you do have to make sure that you're skipping the events for 1 of each type of rare, otherwise you might not be able to complete the fusion. I guess that's something to note about this fusion in particular, because there is 1 rare per event, so you need to make sure that you're skipping the right events, otherwise you skip 2 of the same rare, you won't be able to complete the fusion, and that's the downside of not having all 16 be the same rare, I guess. One last thing to note here is that CVC, probably non-personal rewards, is going to be basically right here at the end of the fusion, and so you're pretty much guaranteed to get 30,000 points unless you happen to pull him during the champion chase, I guess, or the summon rush. But you're basically guaranteed 30,000 points because he is going to be a new champion on your account and a new legendary specifically. So just be prepared for a majority of people in your CVC to have an extra 30,000 points in your point totals. Last but not least, I always put my energy plan down here so you guys can see what I plan to do or how I plan to allocate my energy. And the main thing I want to highlight here is that I'm not doing any dragon today, even though the tournament has started, because I'm waiting for Dungeon Divers to start tomorrow, in my time zone. So it starts tomorrow. So I'm going to be working on champion training, holding back a little bit on the energy, and then I'll make sure to go ham tomorrow once I can double dip with the divers and from the champion training as well as the dragon tournament. Now, since this is a traditional fusion, I guess I should also highlight that we do have the potion keeps in the days that they're open, because you will need a certain amount of potions to complete the fusion. If we hop over, I do have this in a separate tab here, and again, this spreadsheet will be linked down in the description box down below if you want to check it out for yourself, particularly if you want to take a screenshot here of all of the potions you will require to complete the fusion. So you can take a look at this. There's a smattering of lesser ones, of greater ones, and superior depending on the affinity of the rares and the epics, and this is the total you're going to need. So just keep in mind that 12 arcane, you could do arcane at any point, but stuff like the 12 force and the 12 spirit, make sure that you go and check which days they're open in case you need more. I get majority of them from Demon Lord Clan Boss because I'm in the end game, but if you do have to supplement it to make sure that you have 12, then be sure to pay attention to the days in which the potion keeps are open, because they will not be open every day and you might screw yourself out of the fusion if you don't have enough by the end. And the last thing to discuss is, of course, my current supply count, because I think it's helpful as a free-to-play player to just budget my resources accordingly, but also share with you guys how much it actually costs over the course of a fusion to get these done. Because to a lot of newer players, early game players, a lot of fusions seem like this is impossible. I can't do this. I don't have enough supplies. I don't have 4,000 gems. How am I going to do this? And I like to show between the beginning and the end how much supplies I actually use in terms of silver and gems overall, just to show that it's a lot more reasonable than you might think. And then obviously for shard counts, you can check out the shard pull videos that will be subsequent during the fusion, as well as or just to see how many shards goods it's going to cost overall for the fusion. I do put those in the spreadsheet as well. Usually in parentheses is what I actually spent over the course of the fusion. So in this case, we're just under 4,200 on the gems and about 63 million. For once, I have a healthy amount of silver because I've been saving for the past like 2 weeks when we had that break in between fusions. So we're in a very good place supply wise, and we are just ready to get things rolling with the fusion. So that's going to do it for today's video. Be sure to let me know down in the comment section below if you guys are pursuing the Panda Bambus Fourleaf, and let me know how you feel about his kit. Do you think he's going to be useful? Do you think you agree with my grade of a B-? Do you think he's higher? Do you think he's lower? All that and more, I'd love to know in the comments down below. As always, if you found this video helpful, then be sure to hit that like button down below. And of course, if you enjoyed the video, then be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content just like this one. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.